The evening sun cast a golden hue over the quiet, pristine neighborhood as James Parker steered his black SUV through the gated entrance of Willow Creek Estates, a seemingly perfect suburban community. The houses were grand, each with manicured lawns and white picket fences, the kind of place that exuded wealth and exclusivity. It looked like the ideal home for a fresh start. Seated beside him, his younger sister Emily Parker gazed out the window, her deep brown eyes reflecting a quiet mix of curiosity and apprehension. A talented artist full of warmth and resilience, Emily had never let her disability define her. Confined to a wheelchair since childhood due to a degenerative nerve condition, she had learned to navigate life with grace, but that didn't mean the world always made space for her. As James pulled into the driveway of their new home, he turned to Emily with a reassuring smile. "We did it, Em. New home, new beginning." Emily smirked, brushing a curly strand of hair from her face. "As long as they have good coffee, I'll survive." James let out a soft chuckle. He had fought hard to get to this point, rising through the ranks of the legal system to become a respected federal judge. After their parents passed, he had become Emily's protector, ensuring she had the best care and opportunities. He wanted this new home to be a place where she could thrive. But as soon as they stepped out of the car, a shadow of hostility crept into the air. Across the street, a woman stood on her front porch, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Karen Mitchell, blonde, perfectly styled, and wearing a crisp white blouse, she exuded the kind of authority that made it clear she ran things around here. A group of well-dressed neighbors lingered nearby, whispering among themselves, their gazes flickering between James, Emily, and the moving truck pulling up behind them. James could feel the judgment before a single word was spoken. Karen strode across the road, her heels clicking against the pavement with purpose. Her expression was poised, yet her eyes held a distinct coldness. She wasn't here to welcome them. "You must be the new homeowners," she said, her tone polite but clipped. Her gaze flitted over James briefly before settling on Emily with an almost imperceptible frown. "I wasn't aware this community allowed special accommodations." James felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. He had encountered racism and elitism in his career before, but something about the way she looked at Emily made his blood simmer. Emily, ever the peacemaker, simply smiled. "Nice to meet you too. And yes, we're the new neighbors." Karen's lips pursed. "This is a very exclusive neighborhood. We have a certain standard to maintain." James folded his arms, voice calm but edged with steel. "And we fully intend to meet that standard, Mrs. Mitchell, Karen Mitchell." She lifted her chin. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association." There it was, the power move. "Then I assume you'll be the one ensuring we're treated fairly as new residents?" James said smoothly. Karen's fake smile faltered for a second before she quickly recovered. "Of course, as long as you follow the community guidelines and keep things in order." Her eyes flickered to Emily's wheelchair. "We do have rules about modifications to the properties, ramps, and other things." Emily's fingers instinctively tightened on the wheels of her chair, but she remained poised. "That's great to know. I'd love a copy of those rules." Karen hesitated, then forced a smile. "Of course. Welcome to Willow Creek." But as she turned away, James caught the way she muttered under her breath, just loud enough to be heard, "This isn't the place for people like them." James inhaled slowly, steadying the storm inside him. He had fought against discrimination his entire life. He knew the battle before him all too well. But Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. The first week in Willow Creek Estates should have been peaceful. Instead, it became a battlefield. It started with a letter in the mailbox. James pulled out the crisp white envelope, the HOA logo stamped on the top. He unfolded the paper and read the bolded words. "Notice of HOA violation." His jaw tightened as he skimmed through the ridiculous complaint. "Your property is in violation of HOA standards due to an unapproved wheelchair ramp. Immediate removal is required to comply with community aesthetics." James exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Emily, rolling up beside him, raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. The ramp James handed her the letter. Apparently, accessibility isn't part of their community aesthetics. Emily snorted. Right, because a 2-foot ramp is a bigger issue than Karen's ugly lawn gnomes. James knew the law better than anyone. Every modification he made followed federal and state accessibility regulations. The HOA had no real authority to demand its removal. This was pure harassment, and he knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. And she didn't stop there. Within days, more letters followed. Your home's exterior is not in compliance with neighborhood color guidelines, even though it was the exact shade of beige allowed. Unauthorized modifications have been made to your driveway. A simple anti-slip surface for Emily's wheelchair. Non-approved gatherings are taking place on your property. That last one made James pause. He turned to Emily. What gatherings? Emily sighed. She's talking about my art classes. James frowned. You mean the ones with a few kids painting in the backyard? Emily nodded. I've been giving free art lessons to some local kids after school. Nothing big, just a few easels and watercolors. James clenched his fists. So now painting is a crime? Karen was escalating. She wasn't just targeting Emily's disability, she was making it personal. And things were about to get worse. A few days later, Emily decided to take a break and visit the community park. It was a warm afternoon, and she wheeled herself onto the grass, enjoying the fresh air. A few children played near the swings, their laughter filling the air. Then it happened. A white woman standing nearby grabbed her child's hand and pulled them away. Another mother whispered something to her friend, casting a disapproving glance in Emily's direction. One by one, the parents steered their children away from her. Emily sat there frozen, a lump forming in her throat. She had faced racism before, but the public rejection hit differently. These weren't just people avoiding her. They were teaching their children to do the same. She wheeled herself back home, trying to bury the hurt before James saw it. But the moment he opened the door and saw her face, he knew. James's expression darkened. What happened? Emily shook her head, forcing a smile. Nothing. Just people being people. But James wasn't fooled, and when he later overheard 2 HOA members chatting in hushed voices, he got the final confirmation of what he had suspected all along. Karen wasn't just harassing them, she was poisoning the entire community against them. If we let people like them stay here, our property values will drop. We need to make sure they leave. James closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his rage. Karen wanted a war. She was about to find out that she had picked the wrong person to fight. The night was quiet, the streets of Willow Creek Estates dimly lit by streetlights. Emily adjusted the grocery bag on her lap as she wheeled herself back home. Her wheelchair rolled smoothly on the sidewalk until she passed by the HOA's private clubhouse. Laughter and the clinking of glasses echoed from the patio. She glanced over and saw Karen Mitchell and 2 other HOA board members lounging with wine glasses in their hands. The moment they spotted her, the laughter turned malicious. Oh, look, it's the wheelchair princess, Karen called out, her voice dripping with mockery. The 2 women beside her giggled. Emily's heart clenched, but she kept her head high and rolled forward. Ignore them. Don't give them a reaction. Karen wasn't done. Careful, sweetheart. That wheelchair might break our perfect pavement. Emily bit her tongue and kept moving. She reached the small accessibility ramp leading toward her house, but just as she was about to ascend, someone shoved her wheelchair from behind. Time slowed. Emily gasped as she felt herself tipping forward, gravity yanking her down. Her fingers desperately clawed at the wheels, but the momentum was too strong. Then, boom! The wheelchair slammed down the stairs. Emily crashed into the pavement. Pain exploded through her arms and legs as she skidded across the cold concrete. Crack! Her wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. A sharp, burning pain seared through her knee, blood pooling beneath her. She let out a choked, agonizing scream. The 3 women above her burst into laughter. Karen tilted her head, smirking. Oops, guess you should have stayed inside. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not just from the pain, but from the pure evil in their expressions. They were laughing. She was lying broken on the ground, and they found it funny. James pulled into the driveway just a few moments later. As soon as he stepped out of the car, his blood ran cold. Emily was sprawled at the bottom of the clubhouse stairs, her wheelchair toppled beside her. Her hands were bleeding. Her knee was swollen. Her whole body was shaking. For a split second, James couldn't breathe. Then rage hit him like a freight train. He sprinted toward her. "Emily! Oh my God!" He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her trembling form. "What happened?" Emily's voice wavered. They pushed me." James's head snapped up. Karen was still standing there, sipping her wine, watching him like he was an insect. James's hands clenched into fists. "You did this?" Karen smirked. "I didn't see anything. Maybe she just slipped." Her friend snickered. James' vision blurred with fury. He wanted to tear them apart. But then a red light flickered from the corner of the clubhouse. CCTV cameras. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens. James sat beside Emily's bed, his fingers twitching with barely contained fury. The doctor sighed, glancing at the X-ray scans. "She has multiple fractures. The impact was severe." James closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. They could have killed her. Emily weakly placed her hand over his. "James, don't do anything crazy." He exhaled sharply. "I won't, but they're going to pay for this." And he meant it. The next morning, James received an envelope in the mail. He tore it open and froze. A legal notice. The HOA was evicting them. The letter claimed they had violated community rules, citing false HOA infractions and a supposed disturbance caused by Emily's presence. James' fingers crushed the paper. They weren't just attacking Emily anymore. They were challenging him. Karen and her HOA minions had made a critical mistake. They saw James as just another homeowner. What they didn't know was James Parker wasn't just a judge. He was a federal judge, a highly respected and feared legal powerhouse with the authority to bring entire corporations to their knees. He never flaunted his title. But now it was time to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. James didn't waste time. Instead of reacting with anger, he went straight for their weakness: money. Step 1, he ordered a full audit of the HOA's financial records. Step 2, he reached out to neighbors, listening to their experiences. And what he discovered was far worse than he imagined. Multiple residents, especially people of color, shared their own horror stories. Unjust fines on Black and Latino homeowners, selective enforcement of HOA rules, illegal use of community funds for Karen's personal expenses. It wasn't just racism. It was fraud. And James was about to burn it all down. The following evening, James walked into the HOA board meeting with an unreadable expression. The room was filled with HOA members, homeowners, and, of course, Karen. She crossed her arms, smirking. "Mr. Parker, this meeting is for board members only." James didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. He placed it on the table. A federal court summon. The room fell silent. Karen's smirk vanished. James finally spoke, his voice calm yet deadly. "I am Judge James Parker, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Karen's world was about to come crashing down. James wasn't just coming after her, he was coming for blood. The next morning, 3 separate lawsuits were filed against Karen and the HOA. Hate crime charges for racist and ableist discrimination against Emily. Assault battery for the attack that left Emily severely injured. Financial fraud for illegally misusing HOA funds for personal gain. Karen couldn't believe it. "This is a joke, right? He can't actually do this," she screeched at the HOA members. But it wasn't a joke. It was real, and it was only the beginning. James knew that legal pressure wasn't enough. Karen thrived on power. So he decided to destroy her reputation too. He leaked the lawsuit details to the media. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. HOA president under investigation for hate crime and fraud. Federal judge takes on racist HOA. Legal battle begins. The public backlash was explosive. Social media flooded with #justice for Emily trends. Local residents started protesting outside the HOA office. Karen's face was now everywhere. And it wasn't the face of a respected HOA leader. It was the face of a criminal. With the lawsuits mounting, HOA members started to realize Karen was a liability. At an emergency HOA meeting, tensions exploded. "You stole HOA money?" one member accused. "We trusted you, Karen," another shouted. "We're all going down because of you." One by one, her allies abandoned her. Karen panicked. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. The trial began 3 weeks later. Karen and her co-conspirators sat in front of a packed courtroom. And presiding over the case? Not James, of course, but another high-ranking judge who just so happened to be one of James's closest friends. Karen's lawyers crumbled under the weight of evidence. CCTV footage of the attack, HOA financial records showing fraud, testimonies from residents about racist policies. Karen tried to argue, "This is all a misunderstanding." But James? He simply smirked. "Misunderstanding? You pushed a disabled woman down the stairs. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." The courtroom fell silent. Karen's fate was sealed. Karen Mitchell, guilty on all counts. The judge didn't hesitate. 15 years in prison for hate crime assault. $500,000 fine for fraud. Lifetime ban from any leadership role in an HOA. As Karen was dragged away in handcuffs, she screamed at James, "You ruined me." James simply adjusted his tie. "No, Karen, you ruined yourself." And with that, justice was served. Karen Mitchell, a name that once held power in the community, was now a name of disgrace. With the courtroom silent, the judge delivered the final blow. "Karen Mitchell, you are sentenced to 10 years in prison, $500,000 in damages to the victims. You are permanently banned from holding any leadership role in any homeowners association." Karen's face drained of color. This wasn't just a punishment. This was total annihilation. Karen wasn't the only one to suffer. Her closest allies, those who had supported her racist agenda, were also found guilty of financial fraud. The HOA was officially dissolved. For the first time in years, the community was free from Karen's rule. In its place, a new homeowners association was formed, one built on fairness, inclusivity, and justice. The new bylaws strictly prohibited any form of discrimination. No more fake violations. No more racist policies. No more corruption. James and Emily finally found peace. The shadows of discrimination and harassment were gone. One evening, as they sat on their porch, Emily smiled. "They tried to break us," she said softly. James smirked, watching the sun set over their peaceful neighborhood. But they forgot who they were dealing with. And with that, justice was not only served, it was rewritten. The warm evening breeze carried the sound of laughter and conversation as James and Emily sat among their new neighbors, sharing a meal in peace. For the first time since moving in, they felt welcomed, accepted, not just tolerated. Emily, her arm still healing, smiled as she spoke with the young couple. No pity in their eyes, only respect. Then a little boy, no older than 7, hesitantly walked up to her. His wide brown eyes shone with admiration. "I want to be strong like you when I grow up." Emily's heart clenched. She had spent her whole life being seen as less than, a burden, an outsider. But now, she was a role model. Emily smiled, her voice soft yet unwavering. "You already are, sweetheart." James watched, his protective instincts still sharp, but for the first time in a long while, his shoulders felt lighter. He looked up at the sky, exhaling deeply. Then, as if speaking to the world itself, he murmured, "Justice was served, but this is just the beginning. There are more battles to fight, and I'll be ready." Fade to black.